Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players, uncover their stories, and discover what makes them tick. If you love guitar, music, and the backstory of people's lives, stick around. You're in the right place. For more information on advertising on Everyone Loves Guitar, go to everyonelovesguitar.com/advertise. That's everyonelovesguitar.com/advertise. Hey, everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. And one of the greatest things about having this show is when I get a player on whose music has meant a lot to me, and their vibe and their energy has meant a lot to me over the years. And I definitely have that today with Victor Griffin. Victor's the longest tenured guitar player with Pentagram. He was with Place of Skulls, and he's getting ready to reform his original band that preceded Pentagram, which is Death Row. If you're not familiar with Pentagram or Victor in general, and you like loud rock and roll, he's got one of the greatest tones you will ever hear. I mean, besides just being a great player, he's achieved the thing that like every guitar player wants, is to, when people listen to them, you say, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. Well, Victor's got it in spades, man. And so thanks very much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Victor was really kind. He laid his bio out in chronological order, so we're kind of going to go through everything. And the other thing I like about his background is that it's kind of unconventional, and so I like that. I'm always attracted to people like that in general. What is it? The man in the arena, right? So
yeah.
1969, his first guitar was given to him by his dad's friend, who was then later shot and killed that night. So, man, what's the story behind that?
Well, it's, my dad was a bit of a partier, kind of a wild man, back in those days. I mean, I was, very young, and there were always, he used to have these crazy parties on weekends, and he had his friends and they would jam, and all these guys would come over, man, and they would just play this. It was country music, they were these kind of outlaw country guys, and they used to play, and this was before kind of the genre of, outlaw country, which came a little bit later in the 70s. But, I grew up on all that stuff, like Johnny Cash, Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, those guys, Hank Snow, Porter Wagner, all these like really old guys. But they used to play this music, and this was almost every Saturday night at our house, and me and we have three sisters. And at the time I was, I'm like, between from far back as I can remember, which would probably be from like 4 or 5 years old to around the time this guitar thing happened. I think I was 9. And, these days, I think if there was something like that going on, a lot of times, we're so, protective, with everything now, they would probably rush in and take the kids.
Oh yeah. Department of Children and Family Services would be up your ass, man.
Oh, absolutely. But it was a different time back then, and, but anyway, so there were always guitars, that these guys would like leave a guitar laying around here or there. And my dad, used to like try to play drums a little bit and stuff like that. He was never really a guitar player. But this one guitar, that was always there. And it was this 1951 ES 125, Gibson 125. Wow. And they're basically, I don't know if you're familiar with that guitar, but they're kind of a hollow body with the F holes and a soap bar pickup. So they're kind of a dual guitar. They're like, can be played like an acoustic. They're, thick bodied like that, but with F holes, or you plug the thing in and play it electric, And so that guitar, I would pick it up and just kind of, strum on it. Didn't know any chords or anything like that. But this guy, his name was Kelly McMahon, and he was this incredible. Well, I didn't know how incredible he was. I'm a young kid. I'm just going by what was taught, how he was talked about, and things like that. But even though I do have like the newspaper clippings from this incident, but he was a steel guitar player. He was this regular electric guitar player who was compared to Chet Atkins at times.
Holy smokes!
Yeah, and so this was his guitar, and he came over one night, and I was beating around on this guitar, and he said, if you will promise to learn to play this guitar, I'll give it to you. And
That's nuts, course, man. That's like a great jazz box guitar.
Oh, absolutely. And being a little kid and excited about the whole thing, of course. Oh yeah, and not even considering whether I'm going to be able to fulfill this promise or whatever. Just the gift of having that guitar, and but I could tell I was interested in it, in music, at the time. And at some point, a little while later, he left the house, to go do whatever he had to do. And according to the newspaper report on the whole thing, he went to his uncle's house. And at some point, they were drinking and whatever. At some point, an argument happened, ensued. And then his uncle basically left the room, came back in the room with a gun and shot him and killed him. Right there on the spot, man. And this was like a matter of hours after he left, my house. And so, I think about that. I still have that guitar. It's hanging on my wall. I played it. I learned to play guitar on that, and the frets are so worn on it. It's just incredible. But I don't want to have anything done to it. I just want to keep it in a kind of original condition. And so he also had this little small, what was it called? These small amps. They were made for steel guitar, little portable steel guitar amps. And he had one of those with him too. And I actually ended up getting that back from the scene. So I have that as well from that. And, but yeah, that's the guitar I learned to play on. I still have it. It hangs on my wall in my living room. And,
that's very cool, man.
Remarkable. When you look at it, it's almost kind of like one of those things you would look at and say, that's just fate, So,
yeah, I would definitely say that. It's also, kids don't mix, alcohol and firearms story.
Yeah, don't mix don't mix alcohol with arguments and firearms.
Holy smoke, man.
Yeah.
All right. So Victor's earliest rock influences started shortly after that, around 69. Steppenwolf, Alice Cooper Group, Uriah Heep, great band, Nazareth, ZZ Top, Kiss, Black Sabbath. In 78, he formed his first official band in high school called Wizard, Wizzard, and they began experimenting with heavier guitar tones and drop tunings, eventually coming across drop B tuning, which birthed the Death Row song and sound. That was the band, like I said, that preceded Pentagram. In 79, he took this further. He began forming Death Row with his lifelong buddy and bass player Lee Abney, and they met drummer Joe Hasselvander in late 79 to complete the entire band instrumental and rhythm section. So that was the three you had mentioned earlier before we started recording. That was your, the three-piece. 81, right. He met and auditioned Bobby Liebling, who later became the Death Row singer. They recorded a demo called All Your Sins, and they sold it independently as a cassette album. How did you do that? Would you just sell it in high school and stuff?
No, I was out of high school at that point and moved up to the Northern Virginia area where Joe Hasselvander was from. And, I grew up in this little town called Morristown, Tennessee, which is just about 40 minutes outside of Knoxville, which is where I live now, actually. But back then, music's a lot different now, with the internet, because you don't necessarily have to be living in a hot spot, as far as music goes, because it's so easily accessible. But back then, you needed to kind of be somewhere where a music scene was happening, like New York or LA or something like that. But they lived up around the DC area, and I had met Joe because he happened to be dating my sister at the time, and she was living up in that area. So he came down, we jammed, and it was totally great. He was totally digging everything we were into and the stuff and he played me some of his original songs. So, we just kind of made this plan. Yeah, we're going to do this at some point, when it becomes feasible to do it. And when that happened, Lee and I moved up to the DC area and, got several of the songs down right away and started talking about what we're going to do for a singer. Joe knew Bobby and, had a lot of apprehensions about that because, what happened in the late 70s with the whole Pentagram thing there too. But anyway, it was a good fit. I mean, I didn't know, I was very young and, didn't know about any of that past stuff. And at the time didn't really care, but, that pulled the whole band together. And then, once we had, enough songs together, we went into the studio and recorded this demo, and, we had already begun playing shows. So, we recorded the demo and just began selling the cassette like at shows and things like that. But it really just kind of giving it out as well. And then back then there was this whole underground tape trading thing going on. And suddenly, we're getting like mail, well, not suddenly, I wouldn't say that, but within a year or so, we're getting like letters, from places around in Europe who somehow these people have made copies of this cassette and it's like floating around and getting like a letter from some guy in Germany or something like, hey, I love this Death Row cassette and all this, and so it was pretty amazing. And, subsequently after that, got a really good following around the DC area, played some great shows, suddenly back then, it was hard to even get gigs if you played all original music. It was all just like a lot of cover bands and things like that. Yeah. But somehow, man, we just kept pushing it and we built this following up around the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And we're doing some great shows. And, but, things started to kind of fragment within the band as far as, different attitudes and other things, becoming obstacles. And then Joe left the band around, I think that was around the end of '83. And we took a short break and then we ended up getting Stuart Rose to replace him. And, that eventually led to, we got back to playing shows again and things like that. But we ended up working out an independent record deal with Dutch East India Trading, actually, in New York to do a first album. And they had gotten a hold of this Death Row demo. And so they wanted to release that as the first album. In the meantime, Bobby had been sort of, working on me, coercing me to change the name to Pentagram, which I was, adamantly against, but eventually persuaded me. And so eventually we changed the name to Pentagram. And then at the same time, having done that, the Death Row demo came out as the first Pentagram album in '85.
Okay. The demo is released as Pentagram's first album. I read an article that said Bobby was pushing for that because he felt Pentagram as a band had more traction than Death Row did at that point. But they hadn't released anything. No?
They had only released, a 45 in 1978, which was on I think it was kind of, they made up their own label. It was called High Voltage Records. Mm-hmm. And that became known as the High Voltage 45 or 7-inch or whatever, which was Living in the Ram's Head on one side, and the other side was When the Screams Come. And that was the only thing Pentagram had officially released.
So it's just like he probably felt more married to that name than the name Death Row.
Well, I think he definitely did because, he started Pentagram back in, early 70s or whatever it was. I don't know exactly what year, but early 70s. And so definitely he was attached to that name.
Yeah.
But, with the whole thing, I think had a couple of deals fall through with Pentagram in the mid 70s, and then that that last incarnation in '78 was with Joe Hasselvander and Marty Sweeney, who actually later became the bass player for Death Row. I kind of left that part out after Lee had to kind of split. He had some personal things happen, and he left the band. And then we got Marty Sweeney on bass, so he was in that too. And both those guys had been in the '78 version of Pentagram.
Oh, okay.
But Bobby, he really pushed for changing the name to Pentagram. I mean, there may have been some traction with that name. I mean, he pulled out some old, some old clippings and stuff of like some reviews of some live shows and things like that. And I mean, I was against it, but over time, he persuaded me, and me just wanting to do whatever would help us the most, and being persuaded by that, I agreed to go ahead and do it. I don't necessarily think, because at the same time, Pentagram was only known around the DC area. So there was, if you look at it objectively, there was probably no more traction using that name at that time than Death Row, since we were actually active at the time and drawing a great crowd around the DC area. I mean, we never got outside of the DC area very much, but we had a really good following around that DC, Maryland, Virginia area.
Yeah. Well, you can always from a marketing standpoint, when Death Row's back, you can have a T-shirt that says Pentagram and then cross it out and put Death Row.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things. I mean, Pentagram was I'm sure, Bobby feels like Pentagram is his baby. And at the time, Death Row was mine, and it still kind of is. It's kind of always disappointed me a little bit that, a lot of those songs on the first and second album I wrote when the band was Death Row. Yeah. And then now those songs have become known as Pentagram songs. And there's no, and it's kind of funny to me that apparently people don't read album album covers and record labels and credits as much as they used to. I mean, that was a huge thing for me when I was a kid.
Everybody our age. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I would sit down. I wanted to know who did what specifically on every single song and all that stuff, But now every song that's been recorded as Pentagram is a Pentagram song, regardless of who. But to me, those are my songs, regardless of who they were recorded with. And so I have every intention of playing those songs even now, regardless of who I'm playing with and what the name of the band is I'm playing with. I wrote those songs. I have a right to play those songs.
Sure.
And, so
it's all good, man.
Yeah.
Okay. So after the first two albums, you left Pentagram due to all the negative drama, the drugs, the lack of direction, and so on. And you had a brief stint with Peter Steele of Carnivore and Typo Negative. If you watch the documentary, and if you haven't, listeners, seen it, I would really encourage you. It's called Last Days Here. It's pretty intense, but it talks about basically the struggles that Bobby has had over many, many years of addiction and drugs. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to when you're talking about the drama and the drugs. And you had also mentioned that you had some issues at the time as well.
Yeah. And believe me, this is not, it's not only just Bobby. I mean, back then, it was the thing. The other thing was we were playing all these shows around the DC area, and we were having good shows. The thing is, we weren't getting any support, and we were getting nothing from the first two albums that we had done as far as tour support and anything to help us, or promo even, to get on the road. We didn't have a booking agent, so we would get an occasional show maybe in New York and Baltimore and things like that. But I was getting more and more frustrated with, the lack of support to get on the road and tour and support the albums that we had already done. And and then you mix in, the whole thing with drugs and alcohol and the whole thing. And I knew, I mean, I was just as bad at the time. I was pretty bad myself. I had dependencies and things like that, and taking everything to the limit, and kind of a violent streak. And, it was all like the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing. But I knew that we weren't doing much on the constructive end, to get beyond where we were. And so I kind of started, looking around, investigating other opportunities and things like that. And at one point, I met Pete Steele up in New York at Lemoore, actually.
Lemoore. God, yeah. I haven't heard that name in like a long time.
I know, man. And someone introduced us, and we hit it off, man. We ended up, right. It's kind of funny because I had a '76 Olds Cutlass at the time, and we met. And we decided, hey, you want to go take a ride and let's talk and all this stuff. So we go out, and he says, I'll drive. So we go out and we go to his car, and he has a '76 Olds Cutlass.
That's nutty, man.
That was
really
crazy.
Random. That's weird.
Yeah. So we get in his car. We're riding around, and just talking about everything. He was in Carnivore at the time, and Carnivore definitely was not like the style of music that I wanted to do. And he was saying that he wanted to get away from that as well. And but they still had some shows, and then I was at some point, potentially going to be the guitar player or another guitar player in Carnivore, and none of that really worked out, even though I learned some of the songs. And it was a matter of months, and I made several trips back and forth to New York, and he was also leaning in kind of a hardcore direction at the time too. And it really just, I don't know, one thing after the other, we had a good chemistry and everything, but it didn't seem like we were quite on the same page. And so I kind of backed away from that situation. And then, of course, a couple of years later, he comes out with Typo Negative, which would have been like, well, this would have been perfect, But anyway, I had gotten a call from someone in L.A., a friend living out there, who invited me to come out there to do a new thing. And, being a bit discouraged with the situation with Pentagram, I kind of took him up on that offer, and that was kind of the best window of opportunity. Plus, to get out to the West Coast, and get out to LA and see what's happening out there. Never been out there before at that time. And so I took him up on that and had a place to move to. So I loaded up and moved to LA.
It sounds like you were really just trying to get stuff going any way you could, man. And it's like got to be frustrating. Like I'm just frustrated for you just listening to this, because it's like, it's just like banging your head and like, just do something. It's not like you're just looking for any kind of forward movement. And it was just hard to come by at that time, seemed like.
It really was, I mean, I was excited about what we were trying to do with, especially Death Row. I mean, but even that thing was, if you look at, the Death Row videos compared to Pentagram videos, there's a whole difference in that, and there's a whole difference in the sound when Death Row started, which is considered the Death Row era of Pentagram. But the sound we had and the show that we had, and I was excited about that. But I was still excited too after we changed the name to Pentagram. I just really got the discouragement came when everything just seemed to revolve around being stuck in DC, and and it seemed like almost from the time I was a little kid, or maybe even the time that guy gave me that guitar, man, it was kind of burned into my head that I'm going to make it, whatever it takes. And I'd kind of reached that point, nearing the late 80s that I had to, make some kind of movement happen, whatever that took.
So 89, you moved out to LA. You mentioned in your bio that you recorded some demos, but there really wasn't you didn't have any connections there to start a new band in the direction you wanted. You had grown up around motorsports, bikes, and so on. So you took some time around there, and you built a motorcycle, got involved with auto racing, and you basically took a break from music almost completely. Did that like help you a little bit, like something doing another passion, I guess, to occupy yourself?
Yeah, I mean, when I got out to LA, and I moved in, with this guy who, called me out there to form this new band. And he was a guitar player too. And it was really the first time I'd ever even considered doing a two guitar band, but I figured I would give it a shot. And then he had a bass player out there. And then we subsequently found a good drummer, and we had some rehearsals and tried to write some songs together. But once we got into it, I could just tell that the chemistry wasn't there. And, that didn't, it kind of ended a little bit weird. And at that point, I moved out, got my own place, and kept trying to put something together. But at the time also, this is like kind of around the Guns N' Roses era of L.A.
Yeah.
And all these guys walking around L.A., dressed like Axl Rose and Slash, and, having no connection at all to the type of music I was doing, which is like a way darker, heavier type of, that whole Black Sabbath influence thing, which nobody was digging on that back then, and coming from that time when there were bands like Trouble and Witchfinder General and all these, Witchfinder and the European kind of doom metal band thing starting to happen, St. Vitus, stuff like that.
Trouble is a great band.
Yeah. And, I just recently was talking to Eric Wagner, as a matter of fact, and Ron Holzner, the bass player.
That's cool.
But I just got really frustrated. I even tried to answer a few ads, and that was just like going to, it was almost like going to try an audition for like these Guns N' Roses, like cover bands almost, even though they were trying to do original music. It was just ridiculous. I just really got frustrated with it. At the time, I was riding motorcycles already anyway, and I was making some good money out there doing custom paint for 2 Harley-Davidson dealerships, and I had like money. And then I started I found this local racetrack that I started going to, and I'd always wanted to try that. I actually had 4 uncles who raced. And
dude, so it sounds like you had a very wild, like your family's sounds like it was pretty wild. Your uncles are racing all over. You don't have how come you don't have any accent?
Well, I think I do. I moved away when I was 17. That's when I moved away initially, and then I think Death Row started Death Row around 17, and then by the time I moved to Virginia, Northern Virginia and DC area, when Joe joined the band, well, I was around 18. And so I gradually lost any Southern accent that I had. And then I moved out to LA for a while, and then so on and so forth. And then since I relocated here, well, if I hear recordings of myself, I hear the Southern accent like sneak back in, And
from when you were a kid.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, because I don't hear any accent at all.
Well, and living back in this area too, you tend to sort of your accent tends to sound like where you live a lot of times. You just kind of gravitate that way. So, but anyway, my uncles raced, so I kind of had that in my blood. I used to go to the races and watch those guys race when I was a little kid. So yeah, it sounds like a bunch of hell raising race car drivers,
bunch of hillbillies, man.
Yeah. But
shooting each other and blowing shit up and
racing cars, drinking beer and playing guitars and shooting shotguns, whatever. I always wanted to try that, man. I think I just felt like I could do that, and it just was really exciting. And so I had money at the time, and I ended up meeting like this group of people out there who raced, who kind of took me in, man. And I built a race car with their help and started racing at this now closed. It was this kind of historical speedway called Saga Speedway. In Southern California, in Santa Clarita Valley, I think is where it was. And so raced out there for a few years, which was to this day one of the funnest things I've ever done.
That's
and
cool.
I continued to dabble in it years after that. But Yeah. And in the meantime, though, I was recording. I had like a little 4-track, real simple little 4-track home studio set up. And so I continued to write songs and work on, some of my own personal demos and things like that. And actually that's when I wrote several of the songs, or just I wrote everything basically that I had written that it later came out on the Pentagram Be Forewarned album. But, and a few other things I did demos for, that subsequently got released on a solo album. But I just kind of needed a break, because nothing was happening. And I just figured I would spend my time, at least doing something constructive instead of just being pissed and discouraged with the music scene.
Yeah.
And I think it did me good at the time.
It sounds like it did you a world of good. And at least, like I said, you got to follow another passion. It wasn't like, you had to give up music and become an accountant or something like that. you know?
Yeah. Anything like that would have never worked.
Yeah.
So
well, that's what I'm saying. It sounds like you're really into what you were doing. You met a whole crew that took you in, which was great also, Were you, and you don't have to answer this, were you using then still, or were you sober at that point?
Well, that's the funny thing, because it seemed like no matter, especially out in LA too, I learned, is that no matter kind of where you go, there seems to be always that one guy that has the in, and if you know what I mean. And man, if anybody could find him, it would be me, or they found me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there were several, and then I ended up back in the same place, and drinking. Then drinking would breed like, let's, hey, what we need is a little bump,
Yeah.
and then so on and so forth, and then one breeds the other, with sort of my kind of addictive personality in that sense, and just really, just a kind of desire to, hey, have fun and throw caution to the wind or whatever, but. Yeah. I didn't get clean at all, even though I was doing things, that were constructive and fun and so forth, and sort of what you consider clean fun. But at the same time, I was still pretty messed up, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny.
It's kind of funny. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, it's kind of funny because actually toward the end of those years living out in LA, that was actually one of the reasons that I ended up moving from LA, is because I seemed to keep falling into those pockets or those circles of friends where that was all there, and at some point I remember, coming home. It was my girlfriend was out there, Anne, who is now my wife. And
your wife's name is Anne? That's my wife's name. That's quite funny.
Oh, yeah.
26 years, man.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, we've been together like 31 years. We were together 9 years before we got married.
Wow. Dude, congratulations, man. That is like, I don't know how you feel, but to me, that's like my most significant accomplishment.
It is mine too. It's one of mine too, definitely, because she knew. It's amazing because for her to know what she was getting into for 9 years before we got married,
and still get married,
and then still agree, and still go for it. And she is definitely, my biggest supporter, of all time, time.
That's great.
And she has had a big dislike for a lot of things I've gotten into, but yet she has. She's been there. She's been there through it all. And, but anyway, some of the stuff that I was, the whole drugs and alcohol thing and just taking it to the limit is one of the reasons I decided it was time to move from California and move back east again, just to try to get away from that and, try to live a cleaner lifestyle. So I remember coming home one day and just telling her just out of the blue, hey, we got to move. Let's get ready. Let's pack up, get out of here. And, and she had kind of just like really gotten into living in California, but that's how good, but that's how great she's been. She was just like, well, if that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do, and so we took off and split and, headed back east.
But to your credit, so it sounds like you were you were using or whatever, but like both times it was like, You know how many times it take to get sober? As many as it takes, right? But so like, okay, you left, boom, and then you got it. Then you were out in LA, sort of same thing. You left. So it sounded like, these were like efforts at, in the back of your mind, you knew what was going on and, that it wasn't going to work long term. It's interesting. You said the drug man always managed to find you. I've talked to guys that have gotten sober and gone to a program, a 12-step, and a lot of them are still in programs, even though they've been sober for years. And wherever they travel now, they go to meetings. And I remember asking one person, I don't remember who it was. I said, "Oh, that's really cool that you go to meetings when you're out of town." He goes, "Hey, I always managed to find the drug man when I was out of town. I could find a freaking meeting, and it was like, and so I've heard this. Your story resonates with other guys that I've spoken to, man. Very similar thing. Yeah. Yeah. So you moved to the East Coast, and what convinced you that it was time to rejoin Pentagram, or was that just best offer available?
That's kind of funny. I guess I probably skipped a little bit, it slipped my mind actually a couple about the move from California, because I was kicking around what had actually happened right before. I was kind of fed up with trying to, not destroy my own life while I was out there. But at the same time, I'd gotten a call from Joe Hasselvander. I actually don't remember if it was Joe or Bobby who got in touch with me. But they had contacted me because Peaceville Records had contacted them, and they wanted to reissue the first 2 Pentagram albums and give us a contract to record a brand new album.
Wow.
And this was just kind of, out of the blue. And so I was kind of kicking that around. It's like, wow. And I called Joe back a couple of times, or Bobby. And initially I was like, I really got to think about this, but I was leaning toward it. And then I wanted to know if Marty, the bass player, was going to be in the band. And if he was, then that would be basically the original band, or the original band of that era, that I'd been in. And he was in as well, he was into it as well. So, and the combination of that, coming together, and the need to actually get out of California for my own, health, was really the prompt that I needed, to actually make the move.
That's great.
Yeah. So it was good, being able to come back to something that was going to be coming together almost immediately was, very inviting and very, very cool to have something to go to. Even though I got to tell you, I haven't been a little bit worried about, the combination of Bobby and myself being together as well, so I was potentially coming back into something that I was running from already. But
yeah. But so what happened though? Did you do did Peaceville bankroll the third record, and was that done at that time?
Yeah, basically all that came together, came back. They got the process going. They reissued the first 2 albums, and contracted us to do a third brand new album. And so, it was almost immediately, when I got back, I moved into a house, found a house to rent. We started rehearsals almost right away, and ended up, recorded some of the songs I'd been doing demos, in my apartment in California, became like half the songs on the album that was going to became Be Forewarned, and that new Peaceville album,
Where were you living? Where did you move back to Virginia area?
I moved back to Northern Virginia. Yeah. A town called Woodbridge. It's about, I think it's about 15 miles south, right outside of DC.
And then, okay, but then it says he did a brief stint with Cathedral supporting Black Sabbath on an extensive European tour that didn't end well. So had a question, what happened there? But how come was Pentagram not touring?
Well, that happened. We got back to Virginia in early 93, early 93. And so we went right to work. we got got the songs rehearsed and ready to go in the studio to record. We were actually in the studio recording. We had actually begun to do shows too, and the shows were phenomenal, man. Right out of the gate, we like booked some shows, and boom, it was like the same fan base and probably more from the last shows we'd done, like in say '88. The show was just an incredible, response. And so we had been doing that as well. But then we were in the studio to record, and in the middle of the production, we had finished the recording. We were in the middle of production for Be Forewarned, and Cathedral was coming through town on a tour, and they wanted us to open for them a couple of shows in DC. So we ended up getting on that bill. And it was Pentagram and Cathedral. It seems like there was a third band, but it escapes me at the moment. This was in '94 or late '93, and I got to talking to Lee Dorian, the singer for Cathedral, and I don't remember if it was a later phone call or whatever, but anyway, he said that. The one guitar player in their band, they were going to replace him, or he quit or something, and they invited me to do this tour with them that was coming up in the spring of '94, opening for Black Sabbath, an extensive European tour. It was their oh man, what was the name of that tour? I don't remember. For some reason it escapes me. The album that Black Sabbath was releasing. But I accepted it on kind of one condition, because they were talking about they were getting a new drummer as well. And I said, well, how about we get Joe Hasselvander, and then we come as a package to the band. And I mean, Joe and our chemistry playing together is just phenomenal too, and so that would bring everything much tighter and quicker together as well. And Cross Purposes tour, that was the Black Sabbath album. And anyway, they agreed. I mean, they jumped right on that. And so we talked to Bobby and Marty and told them, well, hey, we've got this opportunity. And it wasn't as if we were leaving to go permanently join Cathedral. We told them that, we have this new album in the works, and we can only commit as much as this tour. We can't really commit beyond that. That wasn't necessarily closing the door beyond that, but we weren't making any commitments beyond it. And so we had to leave in the middle of production and went to do this tour. It turns out, I was going through, and even though, everything I said about Ann is definitely true, we were actually going through some relational problems.
Sure.
At this time. And so it was a very bad timing for me to have to leave at that point when this tour started. And unfortunately, I was really back into drinking heavily and doing whatever. And so being out on the road at this time, especially, I mean, this should have been a time and definitely one of my highlights, of my career at the time, was to be on the road with Black Sabbath of all people. Tony Iommi being one of my huge influences, from the '70s.
Can I ask you about that?
When I was 14 years old and all this, and then ended up being on the road with them, and I was just mentally in no condition to be able to handle this entire thing. Plus, we were ended up being on this tour bus with this other band, Godspeed. The name of the band was Godspeed. There were 5 guys in that band. So there's 5 guys in Cathedral. And then you've got a bus driver, a tour manager, and a sound man, and 2 roadies. All on the same
13 people on a bus.
And it was insane. It was totally insane. There's never a moment when everybody's sleeping at the same time or everybody's up at the same time. It's always half and half, half of us are drunk at this time and the other half are straight. And it just became the most stressful thing you'd ever want to, put yourself through. And a lot, somehow there were a lot of violent drunks on the bus. You know, it wasn't.
You got 13 heavy metal dudes. I mean, that's not like shocking, you know?
Yeah, and I think at the time, with my personal situation, I was probably one of the most violent, and it was a recipe for disaster, you know. And I remember, I guess saying that it didn't end well. You know, I was confronted toward the end of it. I'm not going to go into a bunch of details because I don't know how much, you know, I don't want to like air a bunch of dirty laundry.
No, totally, yeah.
But, you know, I remember we were in Budapest, Hungary, and at this bar one night, and this is weeks into the tour. I think it was like an 11-week tour or something. And, you know, and exhausted, and I'm sitting in some weird like bar and at 3:00 in the morning, you know, drinking wine with Lee and Gaz, the guitar player the other guitar player in Cathedral. And they kind of just started interrogating me about, you know, why are you acting this way? And, you know, and then, you know, but not just like in a concerned way, more like a demeaning way, you know, or that's the way I perceived it at the time. I could be totally wrong in the way they meant it. But I took offense to it and just said, hey, I'm just trying to be cool and finish this tour. We only have, you know, a couple of weeks left or whatever it was. And it just escalated to the point where I just, you know, freaking lost my temper. And the next thing you know, man, I'm up and grabbed Lee and like threw him into a wall, and all these chairs collapsed on top of him and all this stuff. And they were like, you know, that's fucking it. You know, and they were gone, and then I'm in the middle of Budapest at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, not knowing how to get back to the bus and all this. And somehow I ended up catching a cab and getting back to the bus, and then just stomping onto the bus and finding my bunk and crashing. And the next thing I know, the tour manager's waking me up to tell me that he's going to give me a ride to the airport and shipping me out. So I basically was fired, you know, before the end of the tour. But again, I don't know, man, you know, it's kind of crazy. You know, I think rock and roll has changed so much, you know, at the time, you know, in my head, I guess you go back to stories of reading, you know, rock stars throwing furniture out hotel windows and getting in fights, and, you know, Rolling Stones and all this, you know, crazy stuff. And to me, it was, hey, I'm just living the lifestyle, but hey, I guess you take it to a limit at some point.
Couple of questions. Thanks for sharing that. Number one, did you get a chance to interact with Tony at all?
Yeah, I did a little bit. I mean,
you're not, I guess, very dissimilar players, to be honest with you.
Right. I think that with my mindset at the time, I was just so I really didn't want to be having to go through that whole relationship thing at the time. I mean, nobody does, of course, you know. I mean,
nobody wakes up and says, "Man, I can't wait to fucking be miserable with my wife today." You know,
I mean, and when you're in that, you know, and you know, no guy, you know, and it becomes an ego thing too. You know, you feel like the freaking guy wearing panties on his head or something, you know, and it's like. And so it was a really bad timing, and I don't think at the time. I know for sure that I wasn't appreciating what I was being able to do at the time in the company I was with. You know, totally. If I hadn't had all this other garbage going on in my head, I think I definitely would have been more grateful and more probably had better etiquette as far as, you know, approaching those guys and, you know, telling them, you know, being more vocal about, you know, what they meant to me as musicians and and the band and everything, because it was huge. But I had so much emotional baggage at the time, you know, and then trying to, you know, and self-medicate, you know, with alcohol and drugs to temper that I really, I mean, I had a couple of like real just casual, you know, pass in the hallway at the, you know, backstage or something. Oh, hey man, you know, yeah, you're a great influence on me, man. You know, and I didn't even know how to act back then. I was just like, you know, screw this crap, you know. I mean, I got a couple of good, one really good picture hanging out with Tony for just a few minutes, and but I really didn't, if I had it to do over and was healthy, I would really like to be more respectful of the whole situation.
I think part of it had to be when you're using, man. Someone once told me this that got sober. He said, you start using because you can't handle, as a solution to your problems because you can't handle life. Then the solution to your problems now becomes your new problem itself, And I think when you're that deep in it, man, you have no coping skills to pretty much handle anything to a certain extent, So
yeah, that's totally true. I mean, I remember going into, they would have this catering tent at the shows. I mean, it was a huge tour, and so they had all that, and I'd never really had the opportunity to do something so organized and so professional. We're playing arenas, with Black Sabbath, and the whole trip back, backstage with catering and all that stuff. And then so we would go into the catering room or wherever it was, with all the tables set up, and then there would be like Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler sitting there having some food, and we'd be like sitting at the table next to them and things like that. But I was just so freaked out with everything in my whole life at that time, man. I didn't even know how to act, or actually, and not even at the time, not even care, and that's what also what having addictions and things like that does to you. It draws you inward to where you're just focused on what you're going through, and and a lot of things are driven by that, as our own selfishness, whatever might be causing you to be that way. It's just an inward thing, and it's just tough. I mean, I actually wrote. It's kind of funny because I wrote Tony Iommi a letter, actually.
Good for you, man. That is huge, dude.
Well, I don't know if you were going to ask me about it later or not, but I've got around to it. But, I did this. I got invited to do this Tony Iommi tribute album, that Great Lefty album. And so I got the guys in Place of Skulls, and we worked up a version of the song You Won't Change Me, which is off Technical Ecstasy.
Beautiful. Amazing song, man. Just, I think, what's weird? I read that Ozzy hated that record. I think it's one of the greatest records. Tony's playing on there is like, poof, man. I just listened to it this weekend. It's funny that you mentioned that.
Oh, I think it's a great album. I mean, it gets a lot of people put that album down, but I think it's a killer album. And it's also, you can hear how Tony's playing had evolved and really had like changed on Technical Ecstasy to where he had gotten. But that song You Won't Change Me is one of my all-time favorite Sabbath songs, if not my favorite. And
I got goosebumps because I feel the same way about that song. I think it's amazing, man.
Oh man. Well, you have to check out my version, or the Place of Skulls version of it. It's you can pull it up on YouTube also. I don't know if that album, there's a limited number on that release, but Tony endorsed that album as well. Pardon me?
I was saying, I wonder if that's on like Apple Music or something like that. The Great Lefty. I'm going to check that out. That's great.
Yeah. So, one of the people involved with that album, and I was speaking with, and I just still felt a lot of remorse for the condition I was in on that Sabbath tour, and those guys also knew it, because there was word around, that I was kind of out of my mind and destructive and violent. I mean, there were a couple times I came in with my hand all busted up and bleeding and everything else, and from some crazy stuff. And there was also a situation where somebody was actually stealing beer out of the caterer's like road cases that was supposed to be for later or for whatever, you know what I mean? And somehow, and it's funny because I did a lot of crap on that tour and I was an asshole. But the thing is, word was out that somebody was stealing the beer or, the cruise beer and all this stuff. And then I got blamed for stealing this beer, and here's why I got blamed. I walked by this road case one day, and I was drinking all the time, but I walked by this road case one day and it was wide open. And then there's cases and cases of Beck's beer in this road case.
That's great beer.
I was like, man, there's 1,000 beers in here. You know what I mean? And it's and so I didn't even put the whole thing together. I just reached in and grabbed a beer. I mean, I'm part of the tour, right? So I reach in and grab a beer and open this beer, and I'm, walking whatever, and it'll come around the corner, and the main caterer lady comes around and goes, "Where'd you get that beer?" And I said, that road case right there. You're not allowed to have that beer right now. That's for this and that, later in the whatever reason it was. And I said, sorry, man, well, from their perspective, they just solved the whole crime of who was stealing the beer the whole time. But it wasn't me. I just happened to go pick a beer out of there. And then so I became the guy who was stealing beer for the whole tour and all this crap. I don't know where I was going with that. It was just.
No, you were just talking about, just all the shit you had to deal with. You were talking about like the reputation you had there when you started about, you wrote this letter to Tony.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry, man. I'm going off on all these.
No, it's cool. Trips. It's totally cool, man.
But but anyway, years and years later, I kept thinking, man, I was an asshole on that tour. I wish there was some way I could, make that right or whatever, or at least, put out an apology of some sort, that made any difference to anybody whatsoever. And so after I had the opportunity to do that Iommi Great Lefty tribute album, and I swear I forget her name right now off the top of my head. She's great. She's going to be disappointed that I'm not remembering her name right now. But she was one of the main people involved in that album and all that. And so I contacted her and we wrote back and forth, and I told her what happened and that I would like, and she had a direct contact with him. And so I told her I wanted to write a letter and just basically offer, extend my hand as an apology for everything that happened on that tour and being part of the frickin' violence and strife and everything else that went down. And, so she just told me she'd write the letter and give it to her and she would forward it to him. And so I did. It was like a, full page letter. Just told him who I was. Not that he would have remembered, but I think after I described who I was on the tour, he probably remembered right away. But,
I'm sure based on what you said, he'd remember.
Oh, well, what's this guy?
Oh, I remember that asshole.
You probably didn't read any further. I don't know.
No, I'm
but
sure
anyway,
he did.
She actually, she got back to me and said, hey, I hand delivered the letter to him or something to that effect. And I never did hear anything from it. I don't know, how far it got. And I actually included a picture of he and I together that, was taken on a tour, standing backstage somewhere and so on. But I just, offered my apologies and, I didn't go into detail about anything, but I just did say, I was at the time was having some issues and, I didn't, I don't think I respected, the people where I was and the things I was getting to do at the time, and just offered an apology for it,
Dude, that is really cool.
So,
no, I think that's great. But you don't write that for him. You write that for you. I mean, it would have been nice to get acknowledged, but he's not going to fix it, whatever is going on there anyway. But I think that's really cool. That's very cool.
And that's true. What you just said, it is, when you do things like that, and I just had this conversation with the guy recently, about, he was asking, for some reason, asking me advice on how to handle a certain situation where, he was having some strife with someone. And I said, all you can do is approach someone and offer, if you're the one who needs to be forgiven, all you can do is apologize and ask for that person's forgiveness. And you do the same if that's what's required. But how they handle it is up to them. once you do it, you're free and clear, man.
Totally.
They don't have to forgive you, but at the same time, you let yourself out of prison, by doing that. And if they refuse to forgive you, a lot of times they're putting themselves in prison by that. So let them carry that burden. Totally. I mean, there's a scripture, there's a scripture that says, live peaceably with all men as far as so much as it depends on you, and basically that's a lot of truth to that.
Let me ask you this. So you're like night and day. You're not the same dude, clearly, right? Your communication skills are good. I mean, this is a mellow conversation, so there's probably no reason for you to be angry, but my sense is that your energy is like not in that zone at all anymore. Right. What was the trigger to change that? Like, what was like, I don't know if you want to call it bottom, because it may not have been bottom and maybe something else. And what did you actually do? Because I used to be an asshole when I was younger, and it's not something that you fix. Like, it's not like, hey man, I read this self-help book and I'm finished. Yeah. I wish, it's like a period of like detoxifying your assholeness and like getting all that anger out of you. It's somehow, what was it for you? The trigger and the process, I guess.
Well, as far as not being an asshole, I think it's still an ongoing process.
Oh, always. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I definitely still have things in me that I would consider undesirable, and the way, and I have a bad temper at times and all this kind of stuff, and it comes out. And unfortunately for Ann, my wife, she gets the brunt of it, whether it's something she did or not. But, then there's the regret of that, immediately after. But it was, I would wake up in a stupor and like going, man, I got to stop being an asshole, and then you do okay for a while. And then the next thing you know, you're back in it. And so it really wasn't, like you said, I mean, it's not reading a book and then, I'm cool now. And it was a bunch of different learned habits along the way. I think it was, I recall at some point too, where, I just became fed up with like taking shit from other people at some point too, when I was younger, and it's like going, that's it, man. I'm just not taking crap, and if I got to be a jerk, to not be taken advantage of or not be, whatever, then I'll do whatever it takes. And I think there was a time when I was almost purposely an asshole, just because. And I don't know how that makes sense or how that even sounds, but
scary enough. I actually understand that, because I was sort of like that, but I didn't have any, this is not about me, it's about you. But for me, I had no frame of reference on the right way to act. And that was my frustration. Like if I had like a role model or like, it would have been easy, but I had to like learn. It was like being a baby, learning how to walk, to be honest with you. For me anyway, it was like, I didn't know literally like had no clue how to behave. So it was like, so I understand exactly what you're saying, because you don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think and that makes sense to me too, because on that level, the way I was brought up and the way my dad was, and he was kind of a party or hellraiser kind of guy, and I was brought up around all that kind of stuff. And I was brought up around, his friends, drinking and there were even fights and things like that back then, alcohol fueled and all that type of stuff. Sure. And then, in my, as I grew up, moved away, my later teens, throughout my 20s. And then, of course, I just seemed to gravitate toward all these different situations that not knowing, like you said, not really knowing how to act. And also, and I guess something in me thinking that, that being an asshole would have somehow gained me more respect. I don't know. You know, it wasn't like, sometimes it wasn't a conscious thing to just, oh, I'm going to be a jerk, even though what I said before was that, you know, I wanted to be enough of a jerk that people didn't feel like they could take advantage of me, you know. None of it really makes sense. You know, you're going about it all the wrong way when you're thinking with that frame of mind.
Yeah, but if you don't know how to, like, let's say, you know, not have people take advantage of you without being confrontational, you don't know how to do it, you know?
Right.
I totally get it, man. I totally get it. Yeah. If you don't know, you don't know. And so, like, there's no book or there's no course on how to not be an asshole, you know, how to be gentle without getting stepped on. That doesn't really exist. So you just have to go through a process to learn that somehow.
Well, and I guess, you know, and part of that leading up to the thing, you know, with how bad I got, you know, before and with the cathedral thing, you know, when I was out in LA, I got more and more into the biker scene out there as well, which I started building motorcycles out there. Built my first personal motorcycle out there. I had a Sportster, and then I traded that for this kind of basket case 76 shovelhead, which, like, you know, chopper, tore that down, rebuilt that from the ground up, ended up getting, you know, this, with the bike scene out there. And then there was a place called Williams Motors, which was all run by Hell's Angels, that ended up like rebuilding the bottom end on my bike. And then I found out, you know, I was cruising with some guys out there, and, you know, going to titty bars and dance bars and things like that, that were all like biker hangouts. And, you know, it's, again, you know, I was kind of when I was a kid, you know, I was kind of this like skinny kid, you know, skinny, small kid, not necessarily, you know, I got bullied around and, you know, throughout like 4th, 5th grade, and then middle school by this one jackass guy who just like is.
Let's out him right now.
Yeah. And, you know, and again, like, you know, I didn't know how to handle myself. I didn't know, even when I grew and got bigger and didn't need to be that way, and got over a lot of those things. But, you know, I just became, you know, start to become too, you know, more and more like people you hang around in a sense, as well, as far as their influence, you know? And so
totally. You are who you hang out with, man.
Yeah. And so I got a lot of that too out in LA, you know, hanging around the biker scene and stuff like that. And got pretty involved in all that. Even considered, you know, joining a club and all this other stuff at the time. But, you know, of course, learning more and more about that too, I didn't, you know, I was sure I didn't have what it took to do to go.
That would have gone down well at home with Anne.
Oh, yeah. She wasn't looking too kindly on it even back then, you know. She has such a great heart, you know, and such great patience with me, and in the past and still now to this day. It's amazing, pretty amazing. She's stuck it out. She deserves a lot of credit.
So 97, you get married, you find God, and you take the next 3 years off to regroup. What was the trigger for that? Because, like, you know, we're talking about, I was just about to join the biker club, and now you, and now you find God. What happened?
Well, you know, through this whole thing, and it's very personal, because through like my whole, like all those years of everything growing up, even from the time I was like probably 7 or 8 years old, you know, and I understand that, you know, you don't want to get into a bunch of political conversation or religious conversation, because really, you know, people are going to believe what they believe. You're not going to change anybody's mind about anything through arguing about it or whatever. But I think that just, you know, it's just a respect, you know, and I try not to be a Bible beater or anything like that. I don't consider, you know, where I am now doesn't make me a better person than anyone, you know, and that's, and we're all kind of in the same boat, you know. But the thing is, you know, I felt like whether you have a belief in God or not, but I always did. I was confronted, like when I was a little kid one time, from one of those which scared me to death and which made me not want to end up that way, and which probably caused me to run even harder, in a sense. But at the same time, I was confronted by one of those guys, like a preacher type of guy in a three-piece suit, and telling me that if I didn't do this and this right now and say this prayer, accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior and all this kind of, stuff. I mean, I don't know, probably everybody gets that somewhere at some point in life.
Yeah.
At the time I was like, well, and I was just, becoming aware, really, like, I don't know how old I was. I knew enough to know that I didn't want to be that kind of guy. Even in my teens, especially, I thought that to become a believer in God or to accept Jesus or that, you somehow there was a metamorphosis that took place where you ended up like wearing a suit with a, like this haircut,
becoming an accountant. Yeah.
You became an accountant. You went around hassling people about Jesus, man.
But again, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't have anybody to go to and say, hey, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Where are you supposed to get this information?
Yeah.
So I mean, it sounds silly, but I get it. If you don't have a resource and it's hard to imagine not having basic resources, but not for me, because I didn't have them. So I totally get it, man. I mean, I'm not saying our backgrounds are the same, but I understand not having like guidelines or just like some safe place to go to say, hey, how does this work? How does that work?
Yeah.
You're on your own, man. You're like, scrambling. It's up to you. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. And how the hell do you figure that out when you're 9? That's not like, you can't. It's just period. You can't.
And you have to consider too. I mean, I'm growing up here in what's considered the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And so you've got these hardcore Baptist preachers and everything else. That's all I knew that from to me, as far as Christianity or whatever is concerned. That's what it was about.
Yeah,
was this very hard, strict lifestyle to try to live, and in this book of laws, which I've learned since then that really if you consider the Bible is far more than just that. Even though it's in as far as the Old Testament goes, it is kind of a book of laws, but then beyond the New Testament, then it's grace and mercies and God's mercy. It's not this. Adhering to this certain strict set of rules and going through these like religious routines and being at church every time the doors are open to try to please God or try to, earn your way to being good enough for God and that type of thing. It's which is none of that gets you there anyway. And so I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this stuff, but that's, to me, from my perspective, and being, growing up in the Bible Belt and things I used to hear, that's what I thought it was, and, but as far as what got me to that place was that even though when I heard that those things when I was a kid, there was something about the truth of it that spoke to my heart. And even though I continued for probably the next 20 years pushing that down, I would go through these periods of some pretty heavy conviction about, my eternal soul and my spirit and everything else. And at the time, coming out of this whole thing of drugs and alcohol and the whole biker thing and just being violent and getting fired from a Black Sabbath tour and everything else, it was becoming apparent to me that up to that point, me controlling my life was not working.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you.
Right.
That's so funny, man.
Yeah. So coming back, flying back from the whole cathedral thing, and those guys, and then Joe coming back later and everything. And then we tried to regroup as Pentagram and keep going, and things just continued to spiral downward again, even in that setting, with Bobby and all the drama and garbage going along with the lifestyle of that, where I was at that time, and everything else. And so really what happened in a nutshell was like, we're playing shows around 95, 96. And actually this is when Marty left the band. Greg Turley, my nephew, I got him to come in as bass player for the band at that point for 95 and 96. But I got the news actually that my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer.
Wow.
And, he was a heavy smoker for 40 years, and he had, become an alcoholic and had been an alcoholic for years and years too. But he never got to the place of even trying to quit, really. That was his life,
Yeah.
But he got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and everything that was going on in my life at that time, it was kind of like a light bulb that like, wow, this is like seriously probably at that time, the most serious thing in that regard that I'd ever was getting ready to have to deal with.
Your dad's illness. Yeah.
Yeah. My dad's illness. And, so I began driving back and forth from the DC area to Tennessee to visit him as often as I could. It was really, every 2 or 3 weeks or so. And they gave him about 2 years to live, but in his condition at the time, there was no way he was going to live for 2 years. And he was probably dead. He probably died within 9 months. But it's amazing.
That,
yeah, it's amazing, man, how a disease like that.
Which one, alcoholism or cancer?
Oh, cancer. I'm sorry. Cancer just eats away so gradually at the human body. And if you've ever witnessed someone dying that way, it's just, my dad probably weighed 75 pounds or something,
I'm sorry,
when he died. And
I
I remember I would see him like on one visit and go, man, he probably won't live until I get back down here again. And if he does, there's no way he can lose any more weight and so forth. And then I would come and then he would actually be skinnier, had lost more. And it's like, man, how can you it's almost like skin draped over a skeleton, and it was just anybody knows who's been through it, man. It's just to watch it, man, is heartbreaking. But in that whole process, he was in hospice and all that kind of thing. And then there was a pastor that used to come and talk to him. And I kind of got to know this pastor a little bit. And just considering everything I was going through, kind of getting to your question, I just got to a realization, man. It's just like I can't go back trying to handle the things that I've had tried to handle before with no power to do it. I just don't have that power to do it. And my dad died, and then I ended up being the one to like handle his funeral arrangements and all this kind of stuff. And it really is an eye opener. And I think just getting older too, as you grow older, and I really needed my life to go in a different direction. And at that point, the way to that for me was really just submitting and admitting to myself, man, that, I believe in God. I know there's a God. I believe in Jesus, as the Bible describes Jesus as the Savior. And if that's true, then I needed that in my life. And I find it and found it and still find it to be true. And that is the initial thing, that got me clean, that cleaned me up. We still have, it's not just like you let go of the reins and it just happens at the same time, but it did something as far as my conscience and my heart goes and my spirit that gave me the strength to see it through, which to me felt like something other than just myself.
That's great, man.
Which was never strong enough to do it on my own before.
And where did the rest? Sorry, go ahead, Victor. I apologize.
No, I mean, it's kind of funny because especially in the rock and roll community and, that type of thing, I know there's a lot of scoffers and stuff like that kind of thing. But, as you get older and you start to consider things more and look things a little bit different. And then, you look at people too along the way now. I mean, you have all these professing believers now, like, Alice Cooper, Blackie Lawless, Mark Farner. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, I mean, anyway, it's a real thing, man. But go ahead, what were you going to say?
What about the communication stuff and because that doesn't come from accepting God in your life, learning how to communicate, like to articulate your feelings about, okay, well, I should have done this. I was doing this. I didn't have the coping skills to do that at the time. That doesn't happen just by believing in God or accepting Jesus Christ. Where did that, you had to do some work to get that. And if you didn't, we need to sell it, because if we can get people to develop coping skills and confidence with doing nothing, we could sell that.
Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, I know what you're saying, but at the same time, I mean, that's the thing. There's something that happens. And, if you get into the whole theological process that happens when you are sincere in your heart, as far as accepting God and what he's done and all this stuff, there is something deeper that is unexplainable where, for example, best example I can give, and it is no effort on my own part, was that my use of profanity was simply horrendous. My girlfriend at the time, but she used to tell me all the time, if it wasn't profanity, you couldn't even make a complete sentence. And and it was true. And I wouldn't even be aware of it. I wouldn't, she would just say it, but and then I would recall the last sentence I said. And it's like, oh yeah, I could have probably left out those 4 words or whatever, but here's the thing. When I came to that personal decision, and people are going to think this is insane and crazy and everything else.
It doesn't matter. Everybody does what they do. So that's all that matters is how you feel about it, man.
I feel like the way that I knew that God heard me and basically took me up on my surrender was that the next day after I did this thing. I did this thing that you hear about sometimes. I don't think it's the same for everybody, but I think there's a different process for everybody who comes to the knowledge of God and things like that. There's a progressive way about it. I had already believed in God. I was just running from it. So there was the day, though, where I was so broken that I didn't have any other choice but to get on my knees and pray and ask God to forgive me and for the things I had done and to help me, live a better life, and have some security within my spirit and my soul. And this one day that I did this, the very next day I got up, just living my life like I would normally do, or somewhat, not
without the drugs and alcohol.
Without the drugs and the alcohol, because I was still going through a lot of stuff, and I'd actually kind of moved in with my mom to help her with the process of losing my dad,
dealing with your dad, yeah,
for a little while. So I was actually staying with her, but I got up and it was going about things, and the thing is but my verbiage had not changed at all up until that point, as far as the way I used to express myself, and everything was, F this, F that, motherfucker, so on and so forth. And I went for a couple of days and I realized I had not spoken one word of profanity, and I hadn't even thought about it. But then I was like, and it was there was no effort. It's just the habit was gone. And I always viewed that, and still do, as almost like God giving me that little nugget of proof that he heard me and was there and actually, came in to live inside of me like he said he would, to really take control of the things in my life that I wasn't able to control, you know. So
and
that's my story.
Good, man. If it works for you and if you feel comfortable and like happy and comfortable in that thought process, then that's it, man. You know, you don't have to, it doesn't matter what anybody else says. I don't think so. I mean, you know, I think in general, people are too involved in other people's business anyway about how everybody else should do stuff and live stuff. You know, if you put all that energy into fixing your own crap, probably be a lot mellower place, you know? Yeah.
And that's not to say I ended up, you know, I mean, it's not to say you're perfect. And like I said before, it doesn't make me, you don't run around like you're a better person than someone else, you know, or anything like that. It's basically, we're still all in life. In some ways, life becomes harder, actually, you know, because you're trying to live a cleaner life. You're trying to, but all the same temptations are still out there.
Sure.
You know, but it does give me, or at least gives me, more strength to deal with those and feel like that I have a greater responsibility to something and someone much greater than men, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And so anyway,
that's cool, man. Thank you for sharing. You don't have to answer this. You don't drink now, or you do once in a while, but you can do it in moderation?
I guess your original question where it said, you know, you were saying that, you know, for the next 3 years, I just kind of stopped doing a lot of stuff and regrouped. I was able to totally quit drinking altogether for about 3 years. And then I got to a place where, you know, I mean, I still like the taste of beer.
Sure.
You know?
So you can have a drink now, but it's not, it doesn't.
Yeah, I got to a place where I was, you know, I can have a drink if I want, have a beer. I usually don't go over 2 beers in one sitting. You know, if I have a third beer, then I'm getting into a danger zone right there. So, but that's also not to say that there wasn't some major failures, you know, in the following years here and there as well.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
Man. Where are you at now musically? What's going on with Victor Griffin's world musically?
Right now, a few months back, you know, we began talking again, you know, about doing a Pentagram thing. And then, I don't know if I go down too many side roads or whatever, but, you know, I talked with Greg and we were going to book some Pentagram shows. And, we did actually. We got to the point that they were confirmed, but they hadn't been announced. And, so we kind of, about a month before that, you know, I was still kind of going back and forth as far as, you know, the perception of the band, you know, with Bobby's situation and everything. And so right now I kind of backed out of those shows. They've since gotten the guy, Matt, to play guitar and have booked another tour, which they're getting ready to do in March, I guess. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, I've kind of moved on to other things. I've got a couple of things in the works. It's hard for me to be really specific because there's kind of still in the works, but also I'm a bit excited though. And one of those prospects is, you know, kind of a brand new reformation of Death Row, you know, resurrection of the Death Row name, doing a brand new album, new lineup, and getting it on the road, man.
That's awesome. Would you be recording that yourself or going into a proper studio? Or
I think, you know, with today home studio stuff and that whole trip, you can get such good recordings. There's I would actually like to be able to do a lot of it, you know, at home. I don't know how feasible that is as far as, especially getting good drum sounds. You know, I don't have the equipment to do that. So probably the thing we would do is get drums recorded in a proper studio.
Gotcha.
And then all this, you know, record. It's very doable to get, you know, good, all the stringed instruments, get good recordings of those. Very not hard to do at all. And then I would probably go back in the studio and do vocals in a proper studio. I've worked in the past, especially with Place of Skulls, with Lakeside Studios in Knoxville, which is Travis Wyrick's studio. And he's just I love doing vocals with that guy because he's such a great vocal coach along the way, and he just really brings things out. He gets you to sing stuff you didn't know you could sing, and deliver things you didn't know you could. And every time I've gone in there and recorded, especially with all the Place of Skulls albums, I feel like when that album is finished, I feel like I became a better singer, and it's just really through his coaching and everything along the way.
Well, man, a couple of things. Have you ever heard of a band called Truck Fighters?
I've heard of them. Yeah.
You got to check out, there's a movie they have, and they have an album called Mania. They're in like the stoner psych fuzz rock genre.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible album. It was all made mailing tracks back to each other. I mean, it's phenomenal. Right. This is probably like 8 years old at this point. Just incredible. And they made a movie about how they recorded it, which was pretty cool. Really? Yeah. It's called, the name of their record company is Fuzzorama Records. So it's called a Fuzzomentary. And it's just cool. Truck Fighters. Yeah. I actually had the guy on my show. I could even email you the interview, but, interesting guy. The other thing is, Place of Skulls. You mentioned that, man, you guys, 5 great albums and 2 EPs, and you're singing on there. So what was it like? Right. Your voice is awesome, man. I mean, it was like, really, and I'm not just saying it, I'd say nothing, but it's freaking great. What was it like singing? Was it weird to sing, or?
No, it wasn't weird. Here, the thing is, I mean, I never, through the years of bands and everything, I never intended on becoming a lead singer. But going back to the late '70s, doing with my high school band Wizard, I was like one of the lead singers in that band. But we didn't, we're just kids. We didn't know what we're doing. But as far as like Death Row and Pentagram, there were many times that Bobby would not come to rehearsals. And so I it was just an automatic fill-in thing. I would just do all the vocals, at practices when Bobby wasn't there. And there's been like many times that I would do vocals at sound checks and stuff for if Bobby wasn't there for one reason or the other. And so when I began putting Place of Skulls together, and that was to end sort of my 3-year break, at the end of the 90s, and put Place of Skulls together. I just kind of I know how hard it is to try to find the right lead singer. I mean, you can find a singer, but it's got to be, the right guy and all that, which it's very hard. And I just decided, well, I've been singing all these years, I didn't particularly like my vocals on the first Place of Skulls album, but I still had a lot to do. I mean, I'd kind of been singing on my own, but not with really any real experience and no real coaching, and, but, over the years of those Place of Skulls albums, I've actually grown to really like my own voice as well.
It's great, man. It's really good.
I mean, there's things, that I do now that I never thought I would be able to do vocally. I don't necessarily have I don't have a great range or anything like that, but it works in a context of like a, blues-based hard rock, heavy metal kind of thing. And so, I've learned how, as far as my phrasing and everything goes, I really like my own phrasing, and I don't know, man. It's nice to get to a place of being comfortable with your own voice, because I know a lot of people aren't.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's just taken. And again, I mentioned Travis Wyrick from Lakeside Studios, and he's really coached me over the years of doing the Place of Skulls albums, and it's really helped me and taught me how to use my own voice, and especially to use your voice when you have a limited range, when you don't have a 3-octave voice or a 4-octave voice, you kind of you have a narrow band there to work in. But again, man, he's gotten me to do things in the studio that, I never thought I would be able to do, even in the range department, but somehow he was able to, coach me into doing it. And so I would come out of the studio and like immediately just go start doing the things, from that point on. And then that became my new standard.
That's really cool.
And then elevate from there. But it's like it's like a guitar, if you use it or lose it,
Yeah.
The longer you go between, like, yourself, if you don't pick your guitar for a month and then you sit down with it, it's like, oh man, you're
terrible.
Fingers aren't quite working the way they were, and the voice is the same way, really.
You're not a cigarette smoker, are you?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never smoked cigarettes, which is the thing. It's I was like, that's the one thing I never did. And I'm so glad, because everybody that I know that did said it was always barring everything, that was one of the toughest things to quit.
Well, not only that, you wouldn't be, if you think your voice is limited, your vocal range is limited, man, if you were a smoker, you probably wouldn't be able to sing after all these years, man. So I think the records are, how do you feel your playing is different on Place of Skulls versus Pentagram, if at all?
Honestly, there's very little difference, there's a slight difference maybe in the material, and that's only because generally on all the albums I've been on, Bobby and I have typically been the main songwriters, but there's generally about, it's generally split down the middle, but on Curious Volume, the last Pentagram album, I think I ended up writing about 65% of that album, actually. So there's really not much. And as far as the material that Bobby writes, I've always just sort of stylistically done my own thing with it, And I think that was also one of the things when he and I met. It was pretty. We were both kind of blown away at how our material worked, and sort of was seamless. Like an album could be like, one of his songs going into one of my songs, going into one of his songs, and it was seamless. It wasn't like you were hearing two different styles of music. It was just the band sound. And so it's really not that much different. I don't like go into recording a Pentagram album with a different outlook or a different take as far as like, I'm going to play guitar this way for Pentagram and play guitar this way for Place of Skulls. I just I'm only able to, I just do what I do, and that's the way it comes out.
I will say that the uniformity on the Place of Skulls records it's probably more consistent throughout, if that makes any sense.
It does. And that would make sense too.
Yeah. The consistency amongst the songs within each record is not that it was inconsistent with Pentagram, far from it, but it's right. It's like just more, maybe seamless. I don't know. It's just more together, which would make sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about gear for a few minutes.
Okay, sure, man.
I'm looking at all those guitars behind you. No, I'm just kidding.
I wish you were.
Victor's not at home, so I'm just winding him up. What's your go-to? I've seen you play so many cool guitars. What's your go-to guitar right now, and what other two guitars might make up 2 and 3?
Let's see. Well, if you if you looked at videos and pictures, you probably come across, most of the time I'm playing this white Les Paul in a lot of those pictures and videos and things. And that's my main guitar. It's a white 88 Les Paul Standard. It has a cream, it's solid white, but with the cream binding and cream, cream colored. Actually, it's more like kind of a peach colored binding and pickup rings and all that. But that's my main guitar and has been ever since I bought that guitar. I walked into in Rockville, Maryland, as there was a music store. It used to be called Venom and Music, and I think at some point later on, Guitar Center bought them out. But anyway, it's called Venom and Music, and I walked in there, and it was '88. I walked in there, and that guitar was on a stand, and I just immediately fell in love with that guitar, and I bought it that day. And no, actually, I put it in a layaway. And then it took me a couple of weeks, and I went back, and actually my wife, Ann, got it out of layaway for me. That's how cool she is.
Dude.
But anyway, Yeah, I bought that guitar, and it's just been my go-to guitar ever since, man. That thing is just like, I feel like I'm one with that guitar when I pick it up, and the funny thing is, Les Paul standards these days, I think are pushing like $3,000 for a Les Paul standard or something.
Crazy, man.
Yeah, I still have the actual receipt for when I bought that guitar, which came with a case, and it was like $760 or something.
Crazy.
Close to $300. But it's just outrageous these days. That's my main guitar.
Is that super heavy, weight wise?
Yeah, it's about 9 pounds.
Yeah, that's a big guitar.
9.25 pounds. But that's it for me. I like that in a guitar. A lot of people don't like Les Pauls for that reason, but I just kind of like that hefty feel, of those guitars. Are
you a big guy, like height wise?
Yeah, I'm like 6 feet, and around the kind of roughly kind of around 100.
It's not Weight Watchers, man. You're good.
200. But it's always, I just like that, but I'm starting to have lower back problems, so I might change my mind a little bit later. And then that's my main guitar. Other guitar, I have an 89 Sunburst Les Paul Standard, which is a pretty nice guitar, which I came across. I haven't had that guitar very long, really. Came across a good deal. Then on that, several years back, it's probably been about 5 years ago now, it's like I came across that guitar. And that became one of my second kind of favorite guitar that I have. Well, not really favorite. It just, I've got it set up to where it sounds like the white one, as close as I can get it. I like to have the consistency on stage and that kind of thing. And I set it up for a different tuning, like the dropped B tuning.
The dropped B, yeah.
Yeah, so
cool.
I set that guitar up for that. And
wait a minute, the white one is not set up drop B?
No, it's actually, I generally live, I'll have at least 3 guitars because I have the standard tuning, which is still, it's generally tuned a half step down. I don't really tune very low, except for the dropped E string tunings. But standard wise, everything's tuned only a half step down. So generally, the white Les Paul is my standard tuning guitar, and then I use the Sunburst Les Paul for the dropped B tunings, and then I do have dropped D songs as well. So then I have another guitar for those. And lately I've got this 81 Ibanez Artist that I bought several years ago too. And that's been kind of one of my favorite guitars. I don't know, you gotta like it. Sometimes, want to be your favorite for a while, and then you kind of like, move on. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, of course.
I got all these guitars, and they're like, sometimes like they all hang on the wall forever, but then, let me pick up this thing again, and suddenly it's like, wow, this thing's great,
Right. I think that's the fun of owning like a few different instruments, man. It's still great. Yeah, it's really cool. And it keeps you motivated. Sometimes that's like, it gets you back into playing, or a little more passionate. You get
suddenly inspired by this guitar, It's like, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, man. What is an Ibanez Artist? What does that look like?
It's like it's a double cutaway, but it would be, what it's mostly like, I guess, if you could picture like a Les Paul, as far as the body thickness and weight, but a double cutaway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are you playing amp wise, man?
Amps I've been using for the past probably over 10 years. I've been using these Voodoo modded Laney heads, which are I have some which are the GH100L. And then there's a model that's the GH100 Ti, which is actually a Tony Iommi Signature Series amp. And I'm not big into like Signature Series anything.
Yeah.
I was back in, I don't know, around 2000, 2003, I was going through different setups, gear, man. It seems like I was going through thousands of dollars of gear, just trying to, get settled on something. And all the stuff I was going through wasn't doing it for me. And I decided to try one of these Laney heads. And my tone is like a lot different than Tony Iommi's. It's probably maybe closer to Tony Iommi's tone, on their first Sabbath albums or something.
Yeah.
But his tone now is not nearly as thick, and as it used to be, but it works within the mixes they get and still sounds like Tony Iommi, But what I liked about the amp is that it's the gain on the amp and the distortion is a very smooth distortion. It's very tight, it's not like a gravelly gain or a gravelly kind of. So, and that's really what I was looking for with the thickness of my tone, was like a smooth gain, a smooth, distorted sound, and I really love those amps. And then I had Voodoo amps, which they do all kinds of amp, modifications for some really high level people. You can look them up too. You'd probably be interested in checking out some of their stuff, but they have modded several of my heads, which gives an increase in the bottom end. And also they do a gain mod for me, which doesn't increase the gain, doesn't give you more gain, but it actually just further smooths out the gain. So you don't get that sort of gritty gain type of stuff going on.
Where do you how do you get those? Do you just go to your local music store and they ship it up away to Voodoo, or how do you get that?
Well, yeah, Voodoo has a place there in New York, not New York City, like upstate New York. So you just box it up, ship it to them. Oh, okay. And then they ship the head back to you. But I have a combination of those Laney heads. I have 8 altogether. I have 2 that I keep in Europe for when I go over there, and then I have 6 here.
Holy crap.
Generally, then if we do like a West Coast tour or something like that, I'll ship like 2 of them to the West Coast. And
are you a Voodoo artist? They need to make you an artist at this point. You got 8 amps, dude.
I do have an endorsement with them. Yeah, I have an endorsement with them.
God, they should.
Yeah. Trace. Let's see, what's his name? Well, he's the main guy, but the main dude at Voodoo, man, the guy is like, first time I ever talked to him, man, he got, he's on the phone. He's just like, he was so good on the phone. You think you're going to call up with all these questions and they're going to think, well, this guy's an idiot and they were trying to get off the phone with you. But man, he was like, he made sure that every question I had on the phone, he answered like extensively. And it was just, wow, man. I even told him that. I said, man, I have never called, an amp company or something like this, and where they were just didn't feel like they were in a hurry to get off the phone. This guy just pretty amazing.
Nowadays, I think that's the standard, man. You can't be you got to be business is very competitive, man. If you're not, plus with the internet nowadays, someone go on Facebook and say, I just got off the phone with Marshall and I've never been, blah, blah, blah. And then everybody shares it. I mean, you can't do that anymore, man. You got to be service oriented. I mean, you're taking money. You should be service oriented in the first place,
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. The other thing too, is when I was a little bit worried about how the amp would get shipped back to me. And, I know I packed it well to ship it to them, but I had no experience with the way they were going to ship it back to me. So I was worried about that. And man, they shipped the shipping. It was so good. I sent him an email right away, and I was like, dude, man, this thing is shipped like a tank. Yeah. And so I was really double boxed and everything, man. It was beautiful. And I was just so impressed. I'm still impressed with this company.
That's so cool. What were you playing out of years ago? Like, in the 90s, let's say, amp wise?
Let's see. Well, the early stuff I had this, I was playing through Sound City heads, the old Sound City heads. Do you remember those?
I remember Sound City. I don't know the specific amps, but yeah, that's so funny.
So I had acquired a couple of those things back in the old days. And really my tone, I'd started working on my tone a long time ago, which for me, that was one of the main things. I don't know where that came from either, but it was like, I still see guys who will just walk up and plug into like any old Marshall amp or whatever, and as long as it's got distortion on it, then that's about as far as they go as far as dialing in tone. It's just like, but I don't know. But I had this old Sound City heads, and I plugged those into like SVT cabinets, Ampeg SVT bass cabinets.
Wow.
And then I would plug into a Distortion Plus. Remember those old MXR Distortion Pluses? Mm-hmm. And that's how that was actually the tone on the first two Death Row or Pentagram albums.
All right. So what's this? Not the secret. Is there like, what do you die? Like what is in snapshot knee jerk kind of Cliff Notes version of how you get your tone? Because that's what I love about your playing the most, man. Like what is it? I put my bass and my mid range all the way up and is there any like little secret recipe there, man?
Well, I do kind of a scooped mid-range as far as the EQ on the head goes. Usually the bass is all the way up, except for on the Voodoo Monodamps. They've given me so much bass. Now I can turn it back to like 7 and I still got all this headroom because, different rooms sound different. But, usually the treble is only about on 5 or 6, something like that. And then presence is up around 6 or 7. And but then from there, I've played around with different pickups. Right now I have these, they're called zombie pickup, zombie dust pickups.
Zombie dust? That's in your Les Paul?
That's in my Les Paul, and there's some custom windings that this guy Willie from Zombie Dust has done for me. And also had some custom pickups made by a company called Bolt Electric, which was kind of a local guy around Knoxville. And he's done some pickups for me. And so, but I've also played around with capacitors. I don't know if you played around with tone, if you've ever tried changing out capacitors and, you go into the back of your guitar.
That's way beyond my scope, but go ahead. Yeah. People listening will vibe with it.
So I've played around with different capacitors and things like that, and just kind of gotten the tone where I wanted it there. But as far as just plugging in, if I were to just plug in, like if I were to pick up your Les Paul or something on one of your guitars, plug into like say your Marshall head or whatever you have. Mm-hmm. And my go-to settings would probably be to put the bass on 10, mid-range on about 3 or 4, treble about halfway, presence about halfway, roll my tone knob back on the guitar on the bridge pickup with volume on 10 on the guitar, and that would probably put me in the ballpark. And that's just going by just a very rough setting or not playing through my own stuff, and it would still put me kind of in the ballpark.
Dude, that was what I was after. Thank you so much. Oh man, that's because your tone is so good. It's like great. I really enjoy it.
Cool.
Anybody influence your playing that people will be surprised to hear?
I don't know, man. Let's see. As far as being surprised.
Like if you said a jazz cat, I would be like, what?
Yeah.
That would be a surprise. Then the usual like people you've mentioned already or, that would be expected.
I hear things that come through and like a lot of the stuff is starting to come through. It's almost like influences I had when I was a kid that I didn't really take as influences at the time, because once I got into heavy stuff, like the heavier bands and things like that, kind of went that one direction. But late, in the past few years, I kind of noticed things coming out in my playing that I picked up, almost stuff that I carried with me from a kid, even like the influence of country, like, country music almost.
That's interesting.
And incorporating actual like country licks into some of my leads. You wouldn't really, you would almost, it's not that you would necessarily notice them.
No, you'd have to be looking for that. You'd have to know that, okay, you have a country riff coming up. Yeah, because I wouldn't.
Yeah, but, once you like douse that country lick with like my tone and all this kind of stuff, it kind of blends right into the rock style. But, nothing off the top of my head. I've really been into, I tell you, man, lately I've been like kind of stealing licks from Tommy Bolin. I don't know how. I'm
very familiar with Tommy Bolin. What a.
Yeah, and he was one of those guys, that. I always like thought, oh, Tommy Bolin, he's cool, and would listen to some of his stuff, but I think he really got passed over. after, he died and everything, but then he really got passed over as being like really one of the incredible guitar player. And
you look at something like Post Toasty. That song is just like perfect, man.
That song is insane, man. That whole album, that Private Eyes album, I love that album.
He's great.
And who
you remind me of a little bit, not in a sense, like just the tone aspect. And even though your tones are different, but Leslie West a little bit. There's a very, I can't explain it because your tone is different, but it's the intensity that he puts into his tone, I feel is like when I hear you, that's kind of a similar thing, the same intensity. You could just like tone is important to you guys,
Yeah. Well, I definitely take that as a compliment.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the other stuff I've been, as far as I've kind of gotten away. I mean, I don't even necessarily listen to like the style of music that I play anymore. I still enjoy playing it, but I don't really get that much inspiration just from listening to that style of music much, anymore. And, but, players like Warren Haynes, for instance.
Great, man.
Dude, I mean, I've been like kind of, I listen to him and I get totally inspired, from listening to him. I don't know if you ever heard of this guy, Gary Clark Jr.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Man.
He's a good player.
I mean, that guy is just he just brings stuff now, but it's like this to that whole heavy blues vibe. I mean, he's doing things with like these freaking nasty distorted guitars that is just amazing and killer, man. So I'm getting a lot of inspiration from that too.
Actually, I could see you probably playing well with Warren Haynes. Yeah, man, you guys would probably be a good combo.
I could go for that.
Yeah, he's in Asheville. He's not that far away. Oh, no, actually, he's in New York now. He lives in New York.
Does he?
Yeah, he lives in the Village in the city, which is odd because he's like an Asheville guy. Top 3 desert island discs, no particular order, and just for time.
Yeah, I don't know if I have actual. Let's see. I'm usually not very good at these desert island picks. But you mean for today?
Yeah, just for today, man. Not like forever, because you can't pick something forever,
Well, I mentioned Tommy Bolin, and that's because I've been kind of really digging him lately. So he would, something by Tommy Bolin would be there. Something a lot of people would probably think weird would be Van Morrison. I've been like really digging
a little bit, yeah.
And the other thing, man, I've listened to lately too that I've kind of gotten back into, and it's the Heaven and Hell, the band. That what band it's the band Ronnie James Dio and Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler.
Okay, I didn't realize that was the band was called Heaven.
Yeah, they did an album. It was and it was called Heaven and Hell.
Heaven and Hell, great album.
As a band, huh?
It was a great album.
Yeah,
I just thought that was Black Sabbath.
No. They did a band called Heaven and Hell.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah, you'll have to check it out. I think it was in around 2009 or 2010.
Okay, I'm going to check.
Yeah, check that out and go check. It's Vinny Appice playing drums. And, it's the lineup from, the band from, Bill Ward was on the Heaven and Hell album, and then Vinny Appice was on the Mob Rules album. Yeah. But so it's that lineup, and that's a great album, man. And just lately, I guess that would be one of my picks. I just kind of been into that album lately too.
Man, a funny story. My wife comes to me last week. She sends me something on Facebook. She goes, "Hey man, you've got to interview this guy." And I'm reading it, and it's an article about this rock star who, we have a lot of cats, and he's like, going, publicly speaking out about not declawing cats and all that stuff. And I said, babe, I will really try hard to get Geezer Butler on my show, but I don't really know. She doesn't like have, she's not really, doesn't know anything about the kind of music I said, I don't really know if I can get a hold of him, but I will, if I can, I will. And we'll talk about the cat issue, man. 3 more questions, and I cannot thank you enough for your time, man. You've been incredibly generous and cool as hell. They'll be tough questions. Most important things you learned about yourself, Victor, through your career experience and life in general.
Wow. I guess, regardless of the reason, maybe the atmosphere I was raised in and the crowd I gravitated to, as a teenager, and all those types of things, just inherent propensity toward flying by the seat of my pants most of my life. And, most of my life left up to myself, I guess I usually end up feeling out of control in some way. But looking into it deeper and, typically living that way is, like I said earlier, it's almost a selfish way to live, because, the lifestyle we live and decisions we make it doesn't only affect us, it affects our friends and our family around us too, even if it's in the smallest way, But whether it's in a positive way or a negative way, I guess, in looking back and reflecting on God's grace, which has given me total freedom to be me. And also, I guess the thing that helps me to think more of others and try to put myself in their shoes as well. And as it just made me a better me than I used to be, but at the same time, I have a huge propensity towards sin and temptation and all that, and left to my own devices, particular state of mind and the right circumstances, I could fall back into any of the same crap that I've gotten away from.
Yeah.
So I've just come to know that about myself and the experiences I've lived through, and know that just, that I'm still not beyond any of that. And so I think it also gives me more compassion for other people going through similar circumstances at any given time, regardless of what that might be. And so I think, I've become more of a compassionate person and hopefully forgiving of other people, less judgmental of other people.
Very cool. Yeah. Man. Who's had the biggest influence on you, musically and then also personally?
Well, I guess overall musically, I still have to always go back to the 70s, and because I guess a lot of my style, before I feel like, I feel like at this point in my life, I've kind of developed my own style, but but you don't start out that way. And so as far as the biggest musical influences would be, I still go back, I love Steppenwolf, Steppenwolf 7, has remained one of my all-time favorite albums since I was like 9 years old. And I consider that musically a huge influence. They didn't have like one standout guitar player, like say like a Tony Iommi or an Ace Frehley or somebody like that. You just knew Steppenwolf is Steppenwolf. John Kay was, I guess, the most focal guy in the band. But that, and obviously Tony Iommi would be a major influence. And at some point, though, I knew, as influenced as I was by him, I also knew that I needed to try to develop my own style. So there was a point where I consciously would try to get away from, just doing a Tony Iommi thing, because, we only need one time a Tony Iommi.
Yeah. Hey, well, I opened this interview up talking about that you've done this thing that, every guitar player wants to do, that has their own voice, and you certainly have it, man, for sure. Yeah. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you've done a great job. Really good.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I think as far as personally, man, I have a pastor friend. His name is Stan Durham. He lives in Cleveland, Ohio. Cincinnati, Ohio. And in the past, since like 2000, I met him because he came to Place of Skulls played in Cincinnati. This is around 2004, 2003, 2004. We're playing at this little bar in Cincinnati called Sudsy Malones.
What a great name.
Yeah. Well, the reason it was called Sudsy Malones is because half of it was a bar with a stage for a band, and the other half was a laundromat.
You're
And
kidding
so
me. Oh
I'm
my God.
serious.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. So we got this gig somehow.
That's
We ended up with
hilarious.
this gig at Sudsy Malones. And, you're up there on stage playing, and then you look in the back, and there's people back there doing their laundry, man. It's like crazy. But anyway, there's like this older guy sitting at the bar with white hair, obviously, well over say late 50s. And I'm like, well, this guy's going to be out of here in 2 seconds when we get once we get going. And so we start playing, man. The guy turns toward the stage, is sitting there singing all the lyrics to the songs as we're playing.
How funny is that? That's awesome.
Yeah. So he comes up after the show and introduces. He says, "Hey, my name's Stan Durham. I'm a huge Place of Skulls fan." And man, we just remained friends ever since then. But since that was around 2004, but from 2007 onward, man, he's just been a confidant. He's been a guy I can call, and just like spill my guts to in the worst situations. And I've had some pretty bad ones since then, actually. But he's just been a great influence and someone older than me to continue to sort of pattern my life after,
That's awesome, man. Yeah. It sounds like that was something that you probably need too, man. And that probably helps your journey, a little smoother, man. And we all need that. Yeah. And then, dude, last question. What was the toughest decision you ever had to make, or the most difficult thing you had to do? And God, it sounds like you've had a couple.
Oh man. Let's say that's crazy. Well, let's see. Like you said, there's been a couple. I guess, from dealing with my dad's lung cancer and death and funeral arrangements and doing all that kind of stuff with it, having to deal with something like that the first time in life. That was a huge one. Well, I'm dealing with, something kind of similar now. I'm dealing with my mom, who was, we've just gotten into long-term care facility. She has dementia, third stage dementia. And so we're just like that right now. And that was part of the situation that I was having to deal with today. That's been a tough thing to deal with. Well, as far as decisions, though, with music kind of being one of the main things in my life, and last few years I've struggled back and forth, with being, with Pentagram, really, being in Pentagram, not being in Pentagram, and dealing with certain convictions and the drama that goes along with that, and baggage to some extent. And so it's kind of been where I've been in the band, out of the band. There's been other times, having to base some of these decisions on deal at times with depression and certain personal convictions, like I said, and the relationships that go along with that. So, but really, just trying to let all that go as far as decisions go. I don't know if I'm veering off the.
No, man, you answered it. You answered it. I think you already answered it. No, man, it was a fair answer. Dealing with your dad's stuff and you're dealing with your mom. And no, I think that's a very fair answer. And I think, man, you seem like you're in a pretty good place as far as, staying positive and, not letting the negative shit creep in, and, the little voice in the back of your head talking to you. It sounds like you're in a good place, man. I'm really happy for you.
Yeah, I'm trying to be. I mean, it's like, it's a lot of these things are ongoing, but I'm trying to stay in a good place. And that, and it has something to do with too, not being in Pentagram these days, which, that became sort of an identity in itself. And, but it doesn't have to be,
no.
There's other things going on out there. Yeah. And so I'm kind of looking forward to, what's coming up next and this death row thing, and who knows, there's a lot of opportunity out there. I know for a fact. I've talked with people, people I've had relationships with, as far as booking agents and promoters and things like that. So I think there's definitely a lot more to come. And even just, this interview itself, Craig, it's just like, when you contacted me and I looked into, who you were and what you do and the people you've interviewed, and told Ann, my wife, I said, man, this guy's on it, And plus, your description of how you were going to do the interview too, it's not just like, Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live. Hey, man, do you remember when you were in Pentagram?
That was great, man.
Yeah. So,
that was classic.
But yeah, man. So it's cool. And I look at all this, as new opportunities and new, just new prospects. And so looking forward to it.
It would be my pleasure when Death Row comes out, when the new record, come on here, we'll promote it. All my audience, I'll turn them on to it. It would really make me very happy. So the door is wide open for you whenever you're ready, man. And, are you just, I read somewhere, do you have a motorcycle shop still?
No, I mean, I still dabble in it a little bit. I had a motorcycle shop, which I opened in, it was around 2005 and did great for a few years. And then, when the economy collapsed, 2008, really things went downhill. And then I kept the shop open for a couple more years after that. But it got to that point to where I was just keeping the doors open, and I shut it down after that. I mean, I still dabble with it a little bit, but not with an actual shop or anything.
Well, cool, man. I cannot thank you for your time. You've been so cool, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. You're a super easy guy to talk to. I have nothing but respect for the journey you've been on, man. And, we look forward to the next time we talk to you. Man, if you're playing down here, we'll definitely connect.
All right, man. That sounds great. I appreciate it, Craig. Thanks a lot, man. I've enjoyed it too.
Anytime, brother. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this interview, please share it with a friend in your social media channels. We appreciate your support with that. Thanks again to Victor Griffin for spending time with us. I really appreciate it, and look forward to the reformation of Death Row. And we didn't talk much about Place of Skulls, but that is they've got 5 albums, 5 LPs, 2 EPs. That's a band that Victor pretty much did everything there. I mean, he's got other people playing in the band, but he did all the writing. I think that's a fair statement. You've done like almost all the writing, if not all the writing.
Yeah, but it's Lee Abney on bass, Tim Tomaselli on drums, Dennis Cornelius also was on bass on some of it, and then Pete Campbell did some live stuff as well. And there's one album called Engraved that Pete played all the drums on. So yeah, good musicians on there, man. And
great music. If you like, loud, awesome blues, rock, heavy metal, I would check. Not even metal. I hate to say metal because when I think metal, I'm like from, we're the same age. I think of like guys in hair, spandex. That's not what it is. It's just great, loud rock and roll, blues rock. Yeah. Check it out. Place of Skulls. Great band. And of course, Pentagram. I'm sure everybody's heard that. But anyway, thanks again to Victor for all that. Make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com, sign up to get on our newsletter list so you and I can connect. And most important, remember that happiness is a choice. So choose wisely. Be nice, go play your guitar, and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everybody. I'm out. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.